Okay, good afternoon, everyone. So I want to start off with a question. It's Friday afternoon, so I got to make sure everyone's still awake out there. I want you to raise your hand if you've ever tried to make your reports better by making them bigger, longer, more complex, adding graphs, doing fancy things with numbers. A lot of hands, that's what I thought. If you didn't put your hand up, you're either lying to us or you're lying to yourself. Because let's be real, we all do it that way, myself included. Because in reporting and beyond marketing, we have been taught to think that bigger is better, even though we all know that's not the case. So I'm Natasha Burtenshaw-deVries. I'm the Director of Organic Growth at Flywheel Digital. We're an agency from Canada. I live near Toronto, where no, we do not live in igloos, but I do a lot of reporting. As the director of a team of SEOs, reporting is honestly one of my favorite times of the month because I love digging into data, I love showing off our value and progress to clients, and I especially love those reports where I can channel my inner David Rose in my feedback. But reporting is also the bane of my existence because those big reports we think are better, they often take far too long to create, they don't deliver the value we think they do, and nobody is really satisfied with the process or end product. And that's not to say that more math or analysis is never the answer, just that it shouldn't be your go-to or only solution for improvements. So today, I'm going to walk you through how you can improve your reporting by being crystal clear on your stakeholders and their needs, telling the right story, and making sure everything in a report has a why. So first step is to be crystal clear on your stakeholders and their needs. Because if you want people to actually read and care about your reports, you have to tailor them to who it's for and what those people care about. So first, let's look at the most obvious people that we're going to call our primary recipients. These are the people you're working closely with, the ones who are making decisions at the channel level, and who you're ultimately sending or presenting reports to. Next, think about the people who your primary recipients work with. We're going to call these our forwarding stakeholders. These are the people who your primary recipients work with or accountable to. You may not see them, but your reports are being sent their way, hence the name forwarding stakeholder. And they're often, but not always, superiors to your primary recipients. So here's a few examples of who your primary recipients and forwarding stakeholders may be within an org structure. Acknowledging, of course, that this is going to vary massively depending on whether you're an agency, consultant, in-house, and the many different ways that teams operate across many types of businesses. So in this example, you're working external to the business. Your primary contact is the growth marketing manager. So they're your primary recipient. Can I use this? The laser works. So your other primary recipient is the content marketing specialist. They're not the primary decision maker, but they're in all the meetings where we're doing reports and you're working closely with them to implement recommendations. Then we have our chief marketing officer who, as the growth marketing manager's boss and the one responsible for making all the channels are working together, they're your first forwarding stakeholder. And then we've also got this brand manager over here who, again, not our primary contact, but we're working with them to make sure that our SEO is aligned with brand. In this example, this is more of an in-house example, so you are the SEO manager at the bottom there. Your primary recipient is your boss, the director of marketing. Your forwarding stakeholders are the VP of marketing as your boss's boss, the director of PR who we work with on digital PR and link building initiatives, and then we've also got this product manager over here who we work with to get our technical recommendations implemented. So how do you identify forwarding stakeholders? Don't assume, just ask. Ask who your primary recipients report to, who they send the reports to, and who's in the meetings where they're sharing your findings. These are typically the people in charge of things like overarching strategy and budgeting, or they work on teams like brand and engineering where we need their buy-in. So you may not see them or even ever meet them, but they're very important to account for. Once you've asked, ask again. Not next week, probably not next month, but at least a few times a year, check in on not just the content of your reports, but who they're going to and what those people need from them. This is especially important to check in on when there have been changes in personnel or leadership, internal structure, or business priorities, which I think we all know has happened to most businesses at least a few times in the past months and years. Okay, so we figured out who matters for our reports. Now we need to figure out what matters to them. In some ways, this is a bit tricky because to really get at what they care about can take a few conversations and some good active listening. But it's also one of those things where we don't want to overcomplicate it. We don't want to make assumptions, so just ask. A good onboarding process can really help here, but it's never too late to get this clarity. Here are a few questions you may want to ask to really dive deeper at what matters to your primary recipients and forwarding stakeholders. Don't forget to document this information. I think we're all guilty of not doing it because it ensures that you have clarity on your end for whoever's compiling the reports. It also ensures that we're not losing this crucial knowledge over time or with staffing changes. So next is to tell the right story. And I want to talk about the story part first before we talk about what it means to tell the right story. Because it's true that navigating SEO in 2024 can feel as wild as a fairy tale, where us SEOs are dear little Hansel and Gretel wandering through the woods, Google is the magical house of candy off in the distance, and algorithm updates are the evil witch hiding inside. But that's not the kind of story I'm talking about. A good report does not have to take your readers on a journey through the woods, but you can't just throw a bunch of data together and call it a report. You have to interpret the data, provide insight into it, and do so with a logical flow through the report and a clear connection to not just the impact at the channel level, but the impact on the business as well. Now, not every report's going to have some grand narrative, and that's totally fine, but big or small, complex or simple, everything in a report or a section of a report should tie into some greater theme or statement about the current state of performance. So here our theme is that we're seeing a positive impact from a new content process. And we show this through the increase in revenue from users landing on blogs, the increase in the engagement rate, and the fact that content published in the last 6 months with this new content process has a much higher conversion rate. So I mean, on their own, it's all fine at the bottom here, but it's when we connect them all together and tie them into that greater theme, that's when the story of our report really comes through and we can hammer our point home. A good structure can really help tell the story of your report. Most of my team's reports follow a simple structure of traffic conversions or traffic content conversions. First is traffic, to understand what's influencing the site's traffic and the current state of it. Next is content, to focus on content-specific metrics, how it's generating engagement and how it's building our funnel. Not all of our clients have this content-specific section. Sometimes we'll just lump it in with traffic. It just depends on the role that content plays in their strategy. And finally, conversions, to understand how traffic, content, and other factors are influencing our conversion metrics like leads and revenue. When my team adopted this report, it didn't actually change the content of our reports much, but it helped them flow much better. It helped my team stay focused on what matters most to really help the story of that report come through clear. So now that we know how to tell a story, let's talk about telling the right story. Because numbers don't always speak for themselves and they can be interpreted in different ways. Now that I spend a lot less time compiling reports myself as a director, this is actually one of the most common things I find myself coaching my team on. So let's look at this example where the initial version of the report focused on a month-over-month decrease in traffic and revenue. There was no change in the ranking, so they decided that the story of the report was that traffic had decreased because of seasonality. However, a little bit of digging showed that, yes, seasonality definitely had some element to play here based on historical performance as well as current search trend data, but this turns out that the SERPs had changed significantly. So this was for a US-based e-commerce website, and this was back in the late fall when Google started showing these product grids much more frequently, and this was particularly predominant compared to Canadian SERPs at the time. So you can see here, the so-called #1 organic ranking, it hadn't changed, but it had been pushed way down the page, so it was much less visible. and therefore we got less traffic and revenue as a result. I mean, it's so far down I could barely fit it on the slide. So that's the story that we should have focused on, not seasonality, because it has a much bigger impact on the performance, but also much bigger implications for the site's strategy moving forward. No, the client did not sell maple syrup. That would be way too cliche. I just couldn't use the original client screenshot here. So now that we know how to tell the right story, let's focus on the tools we need to use to tell that story. One of the most powerful tools we have in reporting for storytelling is data visualization. So first off, make sure you're using data visualizations. Don't just dump a bunch of text and numbers onto people. You want to use visualizations to bring your story to life, to interpret the data, and to draw attention to what matters most. Now, data visualizations don't have to be complex, but they do have to be correct. For example, if we want to show that traffic has steadily been increasing month over month for the past 6 months, don't show a line graph comparing traffic from the last 3 months over the previous 3 months. I mean, it's not totally incorrect. It does kind of show what we want to communicate, but it's not the best visualization to show that long-term growth over time for the entire 6-month period. Data visualization and storytelling is something that deserves a talk of its own, and there are a lot of people who have already spoken about it far better than I ever could, including a great talk earlier today. This list was really hard to pare down, but here are a few resources I would suggest checking out if you want to learn more about this specific part of great reporting. So the moral of the story on storytelling, tell the right story with the right tools to the right people whom we identified previously. Now, the final element to great reporting without even doing anything to the numbers is to make sure that everything in a report has a why. Why? Because if it doesn't matter for our priorities and stakeholders, then it's a waste of everyone's time to include it in a report. So let's break this down because there's a few different ways we can look at it. Those are, why did this happen? Why does this matter? And what does this mean for the future? First is, why did this happen? This one's pretty straightforward. A good report should go beyond just presenting and summarizing data to providing insight and understanding into it. This is especially important with SEO, where there's rarely that direct cause and effect relationship between our inputs and outputs. Our work isn't always visible to a user on the front end, and our work can take weeks or months to really see the impacts. So here's a few examples of how we can take what's initially just a summary of data and turn it into a valuable statement about why something happened. So these are okay. We can do better. So for example, you want to say, get started clicks on the homepage dropped month over month due to the decrease in high intent branded clicks. Or traffic to the blog decreased month over month, but conversion actions remain consistent because the loss of traffic was primarily in top of funnel blogs, which had less of an impact on our end conversions. These are actual insights, not just summaries, because they go beyond the what to get at the why. So finally, or next, why does this matter? And this is one where people often really drop the ball because they'll share some great eye-opening insight, and then they just kind of move on and leave us hanging. Like I said earlier, data does not always speak for itself. So do not leave your readers to connect the dots on their own, because they may miss the point or even draw their own incorrect conclusions about it. I think we all know that once someone's drawn those incorrect conclusions, it can be really hard to change their mind. So for example, don't just say, organic traffic to the SEO services page increased month over month. Go further and say that it increased after we captured the #1 position for SEO services Vancouver. This followed on-page optimization work, so we should consider similar optimizations to our paid growth services page. So we're saying why this matters by connecting the work to the results and also identifying that opportunity to replicate the work further. Now, that being said, you don't always have to explicitly state the why every single time, because especially with regular reporting, that can just become overkill and lead to some very long, very repetitive reports. But the reason why has to exist, even if it only lives in your head, because it needs to be part of your decision-making process for whether or not something makes it into a report. And of course, you have to be able to explain why if you're ever asked. As I tell my team, just picture a little mini me sitting on your shoulder shouting, "But why does this matter?" Because if you don't ask yourself, you know I will. And if you can't give me a good answer, you know you will have to take it out. Finally, what does this mean for the future? A good report shouldn't only look back at what happened, it should provide a data-informed path forward. So look at numbers and say what we need to do to positively influence them, or share things that we're seeing in the SERP or from competitors and how that needs to impact our strategy moving forward. So remember, don't just summarize or state data. You need to explain why something happened, why it matters, and what it means for the future. Now, I know I said there were 3 things to do to improve your reporting, but I've got a bonus tip for you. And that is to Rule 17 your reports. Rule 17 is a flywheel company value we use not just in reporting, but in all the ways that we work and communicate. We borrowed it, there we go. We borrowed it from the Elements of Style by William Strunk Jr., where Rule 17 states that vigorous writing is concise. A sentence should contain no unnecessary words, a paragraph no unnecessary sentences, for the same reason that a drawing should have no unnecessary lines and a machine no unnecessary parts. This requires not that the writer make all his sentences short or that he avoid all detail and treat his subjects only in outline, but that every word tell. So ignoring the irony that my bonus point is about removing things, let's talk about how to apply Rule 17. It's about so much more than just concise writing, but that is, of course, an important part. So first, you want to Rule 17 your words by asking, can I use bullet points instead of paragraphs? Get to the point and cut out the flowery language, and read your work out loud to make sure that it sounds natural and like something you'd actually say in conversation. Grammarly and Hemingway Editor are 2 tools that can really help here. Next, you want to Rule 17 your data points and insights. Because if it doesn't matter to your key stakeholders, if it's not part of the main story, if it doesn't have a why, then it shouldn't be in your report. Unfortunately, this can mean cutting out things that we worked hard to put together or that we find interesting and relevant as SEOs, but sometimes you just have to bite your tongue and not be precious about your work if you truly want it to be the best it can be. Alternatively, you can use things like speaker's notes, adding an appendix, or sharing supplementary documents. So you're not cutting out some of that work that you worked hard on entirely, but you're not taking away from what matters most. So there you have it. Good reporting doesn't have to be big, it doesn't have to be complicated, and it definitely shouldn't break your brain to put together. In fact, the opposite is usually what's best. A focused report that's super dialed in on what matters to readers and to the business is always going to be better to put together and better received than a big, bulky report filled with things that don't matter and are hard to understand. So before you go to put together your next report, take a step back, take a deep breath, and ask yourself,